This is Letter from America. Today's topic is Mnangagwa and ZANU PF are ready to use the force of violence, not the ballot, to win the elections. The recent CCC rallies, that is Citizens Coalition for Change rallies, 50,000 in Highfields, 35,000 in Bulawayo, and an equal number in thousands in Gokwe, Kwekwe, and Gweru have added a heavy weight to the fourth and final Chimurenga as declared by the CCC President Advocate Nelson Chamisa. The rallies were successful despite attempts by the police to set impossible and ridiculous conditions and politically motivated violence by ZANU PF thugs. The rallies also demonstrated the evolving citizens' empowerment through sheer defiance. This is significant because 7 years ago, Itai Dzamara staged a one-man protest against the Mugabe regime. He was subsequently abducted by agents of the Mugabe regime and has never been heard of since. One journalist tweeted, Itai Dzamara left behind 2 children and a wife who is struggling on her own. Itai Dzamara was fighting for all of us. What was disheartening about Itai Dzamara's one-man protest was that he stood alone in the Union Square holding a Mugabe must go placard. People passed by. Some sat on the park benches watching him. No one joined him in the protest. But today, Dzamara's message is slowly sinking in the mindsets of mostly Zimbabwean youths who are now taking action to empower themselves and stand up against the regime. Dzamara's message was essentially that no one will come like a knight in shining armor to rescue Zimbabweans. This message was echoed by Makomborero Zwinawashe when he said, "We are the ones we have been waiting for." In 2 weeks, on March 26, Zimbabwean voters will go to the polls to elect candidates for more than 130 vacancies in parliament and council seats across the country. The political rallies in the past 2 or 3 weeks involving CCC led by Chamisa, ZANU PF led by Mnangagwa, and MDCT led by Monzora were a dramatic statement about the political dynamics in Zimbabwe today. Judging by attendance, it has increasingly become very clear that CCC is in the lead for popular support. The contrast between CCC and ZANU PF rallies was like night and day. ZANU PF rallies were held close to CCC rallies, making it look like a competition for popularity. And in all cases, CCC rallies drew far much larger crowds. Some may argue that By looking at the pictures, it seems the ZANU PF and CCC rallies were competitive. Not really. ZANU PF rallies had all the characteristics of coerced attendance. Businesses and in some cases schools were forced to close. Many buses were used to bring people from around the country. Pictures of people at the ZANU PF rallies showed gloomy looking faces and lack of enthusiasm or celebration. When ZANU PF sabotaged or tried to sabotage CCC rally in Kokwe and tried to bus people to its rally in Kwekwe, people refused to board those buses, and according to one CCC supporter who refused to board, the buses returned empty. Where people tried to leave the ZANU PF rallies before they were finished, police and thugs forced them to stay. At the grueling end of the ZANU PF rallies, many people complained they were left stranded and without the food and drinks they had been promised. In contrast, CCC rallies were strictly voluntary. No one was coerced to attend. No one was bussed the way ZANU PF rallies were conducted. No businesses or schools were closed. The pictures of the CCC rallies demonstrated jubilant crowds dancing, singing, and in an excited mood. ZANU PF had all the resources it needed to fund their rallies and other campaigns. ZANU PF received more than $350 million in funding from the Political Parties Finance Act. Monzora's MDCT received $149,850,000. Chamisa's CCC received nothing. In addition, ZANU PF used the state resources like government vehicles, the police, the army, the CIO to, among other things, brutalize, harass political opponents, especially supporters of the CCC. In terms of resources, ZANU PF was the biblical Goliath, and CCC was the biblical David. Yet, in the number of people who attended the rallies, the David's CCC victory over ZANU PF Goliath was evident. Ironically, Vice President General Constantino Chiwenga was right. He said ZANU PF was Goliath and Chamisa's CCC was David. The Bible, in 1 Samuel 17 to be exact, tells us what happened when Goliath fought David. As if in fulfillment of a biblical prophecy, in the first round of the fight, and in terms of attendance at the rallies, far more people attended the CCC rallies than those of ZANU PF. Projections by any measures are that CCC is headed for possibly a landslide victory in the elections. Even ZANU PF uncomfortably accepts that. The key questions now are not who is projected to win the elections, That is pretty obvious. That is patently obvious. But whether ZANU-PF is prepared to accept defeat if it loses, and that is the national question. In the case of Mnangagwa, will he step down if he loses in the 2023 elections, just like what his colleague in last year's Zambian elections, Edgar Lungu, did? The best estimate is that Mnangagwa and ZANU-PF will not allow the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission, or ZEC, to announce that he has lost the elections. Mnangagwa has learned a lot from what happened in the 2008 elections, where Mugabe lost to Tsvangirai but refused to accept defeat. Mugabe subsequently delayed announcing the election results by more than 1 month. During that period, ZANU-PF engaged in a frantic manipulation of the vote numbers to reduce Morgan Tsvangirai's victory from 75% against Mugabe's less than 30%. The figures that were eventually released were Tsvangirai had 48% to Mugabe's 43%. According to the Constitution, Tsvangirai needed 50 plus 1% of the votes to be declared winner. This forced a runoff, which ZANU-PF needed badly in order to launch a strategy of violence. A countrywide explosion of violence followed. It was orchestrated by war veterans, ZANU-PF militia thugs, and security force members who actively supported the ZANU-PF campaign. Encouraged by the army's support, senior ZANU-PF officials declared that the party would not accept defeat in an election because they claimed that Zimbabwe had been liberated through war, not the ballot box. Amid acute food shortages, food aid became another election tool. ZANU-PF controlled distribution, and non-MDC activists and supporters were denied supplies. It is estimated that more than 1,000 MDCT supporters were killed. That led to Tsvangirai withdrawing his candidacy, leaving Mugabe the sole candidate in the runoff. It is from this experience that ZANU-PF's strategy was never again to allow the ruling party to lose elections. An angry Mugabe declared that a ballot can never replace the bullet. He thumped the table with his fist as he repeatedly screamed, "Never, never, never again." What Mnangagwa and ZANU-PF learned from the 2008 elections was the need for a systematic manipulation of the voting process to avoid the party being declared a loser at the end of the elections. There is a hierarchical structure that enables ZANU-PF to determine the election results. This structure is run under the Joint Operations Command, or JOC. JOC consists of securocrats from both ZANU-PF, the army, police, and the CIO. JOC is a superstructure in the way Zimbabwe is governed today. JOC operates in close coordination and collaboration with the ZANU-PF Central Committee and Politburo. Below this superstructure is government, the courts, and Zimbabwe Electoral Commission, or ZEC. Any election results are monitored and reviewed by JOC before they can be made public. A prominent Zimbabwean politician wrote a book about how the election results were manipulated and changed to give victory to Mnangagwa. Chamisa had clearly won the 2018 presidential election, but JOC changed the results and declared Mnangagwa the winner. This pattern of vote manipulation and use of violence is the hallmark of ZANU-PF strategy for participation in elections. Some apologists for ZANU-PF have said that both Mnangagwa and Chiwengwa have stated they do not support violence and have urged people not to engage in violence. But it was the same Chiwengwa who threatened the CCC leader with violence at another rally. When Chamisa said the CCC would not allow elections to be stolen again, this was interpreted to mean he would urge his supporters to resort to violence. Chamisa was widely condemned by both Mnangagwa and Chiwengwa and their state media echo chambers. Yet when ZANU-PF thugs engaged in violence at the CCC rally, where they killed one person and injured dozens of people, neither Mnangagwa nor Chiwengwa condemned those thugs. If ZANU-PF thought the politically motivated violence would be ignored by the international community because of the worldwide attention to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, they were clearly wrong. There has been an international condemnation of ZANU-PF use of politically motivated violence. Amnesty International, the United Kingdom, the United States of America, Sweden, have all condemned political violence against the CCC. Their embassies also called for a swift investigation and the prosecution of the perpetrators. Melaine Robinson, Britain's ambassador to Zimbabwe, said she was concerned by reports of violent attacks on opposition supporters at a rally. Robinson said it was vital that perpetrators are brought to justice and that all parties can campaign freely without fear of violence. The United States Embassy in Harare called for broad support to end political violence, adding, "There is no room for political violence in a democracy." Asa Persson, the Swedish ambassador to Zimbabwe, said it was key that perpetrators are brought to justice. Police reported the arrest of 16 people, most of them carrying ZANU-PF party cards, over the violence. When the suspects were arrested hiding in a local bar, police recovered machetes, knives, catapults, and whips in their vehicles. But most of them were released. There is no indication that the rest will be tried, let alone jailed. The killer of Ncube was reported to be at large. Many suspect he is being sheltered by ZANU-PF. And this comes just weeks before by-elections that are scheduled for March 26. Responding to the brutal killing of one supporter of CCC and the injury of more than a dozen others at a CCC rally in Kwekwe, Mulea Mwananyanda, Amnesty International's Deputy Director for Southern Africa, said, "This assault bears all the hallmarks of a premeditated attack that aims to intimidate political opposition and block access to their constituents ahead of the upcoming by-elections in March." He said the government's rhetoric has done much to incite such ferocious violence and unfortunately little to ensure the free exercise of the rights to freedom of assembly and association. Mwananyanda also encouraged the Zimbabwean authorities to immediately end the culture of politically motivated violence by refraining from issuing inflammatory statements that may incite violence, and they must ensure an impartial, independent, and transparent investigation into this attack. The perpetrators must be brought to justice. On 26 February, just one day before this violent attack, Zimbabwe's Vice President Constantino Chiwenga sent a warning to the CCC saying the ruling party would crush the party like lice. The CCC has been victim to a number of politically motivated violence from ZANU-PF. To its credit, CCC has resisted counter-attacking ZANU-PF. Many people felt that CCC supporters should not allow themselves to be beaten like sitting ducks. What is emerging now is that CCC's strategy of non-violence defiance is starting to pay off. ZANU-PF thugs and the police, in their desperate efforts to stop or disperse crowds at CCC rallies, have been unsuccessful. In the prophetic words of Makomborero Haruziwishe, when he said, "We are many, they are few," thousands of CCC supporters stood in defiance of attempts to scare them, and they succeeded. At the Gweru Mukoba CCC rally, heavily armed police came in trucks. Initially, people seemed scared and stood up to run. But CCC President Chamisa told everybody not to be afraid and to sit down. The people complied. They sat down, and Chamisa continued with his speech. Nothing happened to them. The dreaded police did not dare come to disperse the crowd. It must be noted, however, that under the international law, people have a right to defend themselves using any means necessary when they are subjected to unprovoked attacks and violence. In yet another act of politically motivated violence, suspected ZANU-PF thugs set fire to the house of the CCC Bindura Ward Councillor Oswald Shambare. Shambare had hosted a party for his CCC colleagues, but when Shambare tried to report, the police refused to take his statement. A delegation of the CCC went again to report the case of arson, but again the police refused to take the complaint. The delegation insisted. They went again the next time. but this time they found the police station deserted. The complicity between ZANU PF thugs and the police could not be more obvious. With by-elections just 2 weeks away, ZANU PF is increasing its tried and tested method of politically motivated violence to scare away voters. At the same time, the citizens' watchdog, Tim Pachedu, has revealed more evidence of vote rigging by the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission, or ZEC. The message to Zimbabwe is clear. Mnangagwa and ZANU PF are ready to use the force of violence to win the elections, not the ballot. Remember, Mugabe said, the ballot can never replace the bullet. The national question for Zimbabweans is, what happens when Mnangagwa and ZANU PF refuse to accept defeat in the elections like they did in 2008? Will Zimbabweans heed Makomborero's clarion call when he said, "Let us not allow the devil to escape with the Bible in front of the congregation"? Thank you for listening.
This concludes today's broadcast of Letter from America, a weekly in-depth analysis of the situation in Zimbabwe. Thank you for listening. This concludes today's broadcast of Letter from America, a weekly in-depth analysis of the situation in Zimbabwe. Thank you for listening. This concludes today's broadcast of Letter from America, a weekly in-depth analysis of the situation in Zimbabwe. Thank you for listening. This concludes today's broadcast of Letter from America, a weekly in-depth analysis